Well, hello, and thank you for being here for this episode of the Canmore Trust Podcast. We will be dealing with the subjects of mental ill health and indeed of suicide. So your safety is paramount to us here at the Canmore Trust. If anything of today's discussion activates concerns or significant emotion within you, which gives you concerns about your own safety or about the safety of others, would you please reach out? You can engage anytime, day or night, with the Canmore Trust by texting Canmore, Canmore, to 85258. You can call Papyrus on their 24/7 Hope line on 0800 068 4141. You can call the Samaritans any time of the day or night on 116 123. The Canmore Trust website, www.thecanmoretrust.co.uk, has an extensive list of resources for anyone seeking help on any aspect of well-being, mental ill health or suicide. I commend it to you and ask you to take a look at that website. So if you're struggling, please reach out. If you're concerned about someone else, please reach out. Thank you. And so it gives me the greatest of pleasure to turn to our guest for today for this, the Canmore Trust podcast. And it's someone who has become a dear friend, Matt Loftus. Matt, so good to have you with us. I wonder if you might just tell us something about yourself and your background. Who is Matt Loftus?
Well, firstly, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been something I've wanted to do for a long time, actually, to join you on the podcast. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. So let's talk about a little bit about me. I've got a wonderful wife. I've got 2 children who are 11 and 8, and we live close to Birmingham in the Midlands. I grew up in Kent in the Garden of England, and I met Laura, my wife, at university in Stoke-on-Trent. And then the journey of me moving to the Midlands meant I became a PE teacher, which was a career I'd worked in for over 16 years and loved every moment of it. I really enjoyed teaching. It was wonderful. And I taught in almost every type of education setting, from mainstream to special educational needs, alternative provision, and into college and university. And so for a long period of time, that was me. I was a teacher, and my sort of career was set ahead of me. And I envisioned one day, that moving into higher levels of senior leadership. So I guess things shifted, which we'll talk about throughout this episode, I'm sure. But I found myself now working in mental health training, learning and development, and specifically coaching, supporting people one-to-one. So that's me professionally. I work in the suicide prevention and postvention arena. And
so before we get into that, can we go back to teaching for a second?
Yeah.
I'm so impressed with teachers generally. I think they're an amazing professional group. But there are good teachers and not so good teachers. What makes a good teacher?
So I guess I'm thinking around as in their skill to teach rather than them as a person.
Well, I don't know, because I think maybe these two things are inextricably linked.
Okay, yeah. What makes a good teacher? Okay, what I think about that is that their passion is to work with, if it's school teaching, to work with children and young people, to actually have that at the heart, that they want to help young people develop, learn, grow, etc. A passion for your subject. I know that I'm absolutely at my best teaching when I love and believe in the subject that I teach.
Okay.
That would be a non-negotiable for me. Yeah. I have historically found it very difficult to teach something that I'm not interested in myself personally. Yeah.
Do you think there's something intrinsic in a teacher to make them a good teacher?
Wanting to help, wanting to connect and work with people. From a human perspective, to connect with people.
I guess what I'm asking is, can you take anyone off the street and make them a teacher?
No, I don't think you can.
No,
I don't think you can.
Yeah.
And maybe there's no absolute magic formula as to why. But I think you know when you're in the presence of someone that you can connect with and learn from, versus someone who is standing up just robotically talking through curriculum or whatever. I think it comes down to a connection.
I think back to some of the most pivotal moments in my life, and they were teacher generated. Someone who really got me, who just stepped in and added the increase, if you like.
And I think that's it. It's knowing you're in the presence of someone who genuinely cares about you.
Fantastic. Well, I know that your work with the Canmore Trust has become very important to you because you've lost to suicide. You're part of this suicide community. If it's not too difficult and not too painful, could you share a little bit of that story with us, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And it's important that we do. So during my teaching journey, I found myself I followed my heart and my passion in terms of subject, and I found myself working in further education with teenagers 16 to 19. Now, my niche specialist subject at the time was outdoor adventure. So I had this group of students who had trusted me completely. I'd taught them for 2 years on another subject. I then got the green light to create a brand new, very niche subject with a limited group number of 16. So these 16 wonderful young people, they trusted me because they only had me as the kind of reference point to choose this next course. So altogether, I'd worked with them for nearly 4 years, and very sadly, I lost one of them, Stephen, at the age of 19 to suicide. And I can't tell you how it dropped me entirely, because at that point I'd been teaching about 14 years altogether. I'd been a senior leader. I was a deputy head of a setting. I was the behaviour specialist. I was very highly skilled in lots of ways and highly trained, but I'd had no experience whatsoever of suicide at all. Not through teacher training, not through life experience. I'd had no experience whatsoever. And I remember very clearly, it was a Sunday night, I remember receiving an email from one of the other students just to tell me. She said, "Have you heard about Stephen?" And I was sitting in my lounge, and I remember my wife the other side of the room on the sofa, and I couldn't speak to her. I couldn't communicate. I was it was like having an out-of-body experience. I was completely frozen for a few moments. And then, excuse me, and then something changed. I suddenly realized, oh, hang on a minute. What about the others? What about the 15, the other students in my tutor group? And I just had this really powerful thought that they couldn't be alone, that we had to be together. I don't know why. I had no idea of what I was going to do, but I needed them to know that we had to meet Monday morning the next day. So I messaged all of them and said, you have to come into college. They weren't even due in that day. It wasn't a teaching day. You have to come into college. I'll meet you at 9 o'clock. Excuse me a second. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to say, but there was something in me, a big part, that I knew that we couldn't be alone, including me. I felt like we had to be together. This was how tight a bond we had as a group. So for several hours, I didn't even book a room. We were supposed to book classrooms. I just took a room. Every single student turned up, and we closed the door. And for several hours, we cried, we shouted, we sat in silence. We just stayed together without any plan. And I to this point, even now, I couldn't tell you what I actually said or what I did. I have no idea. But I knew it was important to stay together. And I remember other teachers would come to the door expecting to come into the classroom to teach their lesson, and there'd be students lining up in the corridor waiting to come in. And every single time they'd come in, they'd obviously feel the emotions in the room, and they'd walk out again, and they just left us. And that was really something that really stuck with me. It was the sense of needing to be with other people. What I now know, with the power of hindsight and reflection, is that it was the beginnings of a grief journey for all of us. And that being with other people is so, so important when you're grieving. So important.
You emphasise a really important point, and the literature is very clear about the impact of suicide on relatives and family members who have lost to suicide, but it's not quite so clear on the impact when you lose a non-family member to suicide. But I think it's become very clear to us through the work of Canmore that impact is as significant as losing a family member. If you've been with someone for 4 years, if you've had a work colleague for 12 years or 20 years and you lose them, that significance is huge. And I think we've really, as a society, underestimated the impact of the loss of a person, a non-family member, on ourselves, the impact of that.
It's huge, and also it by its very nature can stop you asking for help and talking about your grief.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that for a long period of time I was trapped in my grief because I felt like I didn't deserve to the feelings I was having, because Stephen was my student. He wasn't a family member.
Yeah.
He wasn't my son. He wasn't a partner, etc. He was my student.
Yeah.
And so who am I to have these deep feelings of sadness and guilt and regret and anger when there's other people suffering in their grief, much more than me. And when we think about it, actually, we spend so much time with the people we work with. And if you work in a role where you're a caregiver of any nature, you're responsible for others. They weren't just 16 people I came and interacted with every day transactionally. I was responsible for them. Yeah. They were my students, and I cared very deeply for them, and I took it very seriously. So actually that impact, even though they're not a family member, is huge. Yeah. And you feel like you can't necessarily talk about it.
Yeah. One of the most difficult things that we deal with as a charity is when we're called to a school, a college, a university, where the head teacher, the principal, is suddenly facing the loss of a student. And how that is dealt with is such an important matter, and dealt with well. Did the school, did the college, did the education establishment learn from what had happened?
I don't know if they learned, to be completely honest. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened, because it's also about me and what I did or didn't do. But there's certainly fault on both sides of this. So I didn't receive leadership through this. I received, it was more about what I didn't receive rather than what I did. What I was hit with was a complete silence. And I think now I compounded that by thinking, okay, so I'm responsible for the 15 students. So I'm going to take them under my wing and I'll look after them, because I haven't received any guidance or leadership or support. I remember I received an email from the principal at the time that just said, so I'd emailed the principal and the safeguarding lead on the Sunday night to tell them. And I received a reply the next day, and it just said, "This is very sad. We should offer support to those students and staff." And no support was ever offered. Nothing came. Nobody checked in. Nobody asked me or the students. And I wore that for a long time. That was anger. That was a source of anger for me. I focused my anger at the organisation, at the leadership, at the system, at the wider system of dealing with suicides in schools and colleges. And I also began to act dysfunctionally. It was about me as well. I began to be siloed in how I dealt with it.
Sure.
By taking responsibility for my students and not asking for help myself.
Yeah.
So I'm not placing any blame at any one person, because I was part of it, part of it. And I also see it very differently now, that at the same time I was in grief, the students were in grief, the friends were in grief, so were the leadership team. and maybe they didn't have the skills or the experience or the training
Yeah.
and the know-how of what to do and how to do it.
Did you experience anger? Anger's such a part of the suicide grief journey. Did you experience anger? And if you did, what did you do with it? What have you done with it?
Yeah, I did. At the time, I don't know if I knew I did. I'm not sure it was conscious anger at the time, but the journey I've been on since, my journey into coaching, I'm very fortunate. I work on a very specific leadership program in Switzerland with Professor George Colreeser and Professor John Weeks, and a huge focus point of that is grief. And when I accessed that, I suddenly became more familiar with grief as a topic, and that's when I started to make the connections. Started to put together, okay, so there are stages of grief. They may not be linear, they may not be prescriptive, but there are stages of grief, and one of them is anger. And I started to join the dots and realize, okay, yeah, so actually when I was acting dysfunctionally, when I was rolling my eyes in staff meetings, when I was not wanting to, engage with leadership decisions, that was me being trapped in my anger stage. Now, I may not have been overt and explicit with being angry in behavior, but internally, I was certainly feeling a loss, a sense of what I hadn't received from leaders. Yeah.
And so leadership has become an important part of all that you now do. But I guess before we get into that, across the whole of the United Kingdom as a whole, we're not seeing a reduction in suicide numbers. What's your take on that? You're inside it. What's going on?
Yeah. I think firstly it's worth mentioning that there is a great deal of good work being done. So it's not through a lack of effort.
Yeah.
For example, the Canmore Trust and other charities and organisations are working incredibly hard within the suicide community to bring the numbers down. But broader than that, bigger than that, there's systemic issues within societies and communities. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It comes down to a lack of connection from my perspective.
Yeah.
And we can apply that at all different levels. Many people maybe they don't have a purpose. They don't have a sense of belonging with the community as much as maybe they used to historically. The pace of life, the pace of modern day life is just, furiously fast. And so the conditions allow or are creating early childhood experiences to potentially become traumatic. And I'm not saying that to point the finger of blame at any one group of people. It's not parents' fault. It's not an individual's fault. But the conditions of modern society that create this pace, expectation, how we reward performance and results driven in everything we do. Well, something has to give for that. And I think what has to give is the time and the dedication for forming early, deeper connections. Yeah. And so what we know of trauma is children can then grow up with this sense of a hole where maybe they don't feel good enough, they don't feel worthy enough because they haven't received the affirmation that they needed when they were much younger.
And yet the world seems infinitely more connected through digitization and social media. Would you ban social media for under 16s?
It's a really interesting time at the moment, isn't it, as we're seeing this happen in different countries around the world and different access. I'm not sitting on the fence in terms of my decision, but I am trying to view it more balanced. I see that, yes, from one point of view, social media is such an addictive tool, and adults are struggling with it.
Yeah.
Actually, if we're really honest, adults are struggling as much with the addiction of social media as children.
I'm looking at two adults sitting across a table here who are huge social media users.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not about banning it just for children. It's not about, if we ban it for under 16s, the problem will go away, because actually under 16s are seeing every single day of their life adults struggling with addiction with social media and devices in general. So I remember reading not too long ago, why is it that some adults find it difficult to remember their childhood? And there's loads of variables to this, but one of them is, well, children today are in so many more photographs than adults were when they were children. So actually, the constant photo, the repetition of being in photos and videos means it's more firm in memories.
Mm.
And if you think about a newborn baby comes into the world today, alongside hopefully its mother and its father, one of the first things it will see and then never not see is a mobile phone being pointed in its face.
Yes.
So it's bigger than just banning the social media to children, because I also think there's huge benefits of social media in modern business.
Yeah.
How you run a business today needs social media. So to give teenagers the skills of how to use social media for good and for business, they're necessary skills in today's business world.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Canmore Trust, we often use the phrase, today's quality postvention is tomorrow's prevention in the world of suicide. Is that a helpful concept, do you think?
I think it's really well, more than helpful. I think it's absolutely necessary. And so the reason is, we think of prevention, okay, let's prevent something from happening. And yet that model alone isn't sufficient. It's not doing enough. It's not bringing the suicide rates down globally.
Yep.
And what it doesn't include, that singular model of prevention, is looking after those left behind, whether it's friends, family, workplace colleagues, the ripple effect, those impacted by a single suicide. Yep. So a postvention model brings in what we know is true. What we know is if you're impacted by a suicide, then the risk of you taking your own life to suicide increases. Yep. So knowing that to be true, then we have to focus on those left behind. But I don't think it's either or. I think it has to be a joined up approach.
Sure.
Yeah.
And in that context, you talked earlier about the importance of connectedness.
Yeah.
Yeah. We use the term a lot now, the suicide community, and some people, when I started using the term, said, is that something you really want to use? And I love it. Yeah. I am unabashedly, unashamedly a member of the suicide community. Is it a helpful term for you?
Yeah, hugely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love it. I love it. Don't get me wrong. Every bone in my body wishes it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And yet it's a place full of complete joy. And the people you meet connected through suicide, some of the deepest bonds, some of the deepest friendships, deepest trusts that you'll ever meet. And it's necessary for healing, because like I said, ideally people should never grieve alone. So if you find that you are connected through a sense of community, through loss and through suicide, then that's now your very deep connection with other people that get you. They understand it. They have empathy. They have a genuine connection. It's not a clinical, paid for version. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, other support services are needed also.
Are available.
Yeah, yes. Other supports are absolutely needed, but there's nothing like feeling genuinely part of a community with people that get you.
Yeah. Well, you're very much part of the Canmore Trust community. You have been pivotal in developing level 1 and level 2 training for our experienced friends. Yeah, a pivotal part of what we do as a trust. Can you just summarize for us the most important takeaway messages from that level 1 and level 2 training, which has been so impactful?
It's also been such a pleasure, by the way, like such a gift to meet you and to be asked to develop that originally, even though I was completely hesitant and out of my comfort zone to do so early on. But what a privilege. Yeah, so my biggest takeaways would be, regardless of the level, so it's evolved, we've now got different levels of the training for supporting families or workplaces or specifically in schools. But the key message is, you haven't got to have all the answers. You haven't got to know a solution, because there aren't any. There's no solution to suicide, as in for those that have been bereaved by suicide. There's no solution for them. So you haven't got to fix anything or be clinically expert in anything you do. But what you should be able to take from the training is that it's how important it is to be able to listen to people, hold space, be comfortable in silence, be comfortable in emotions as they arise, and embrace them, and have that ability to just be with someone who needs connection with someone at maybe their darkest moment in life. Just have that capacity to be with them. Yeah.
We've talked often about there being a therapeutic aspect to the training. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. It's really, it wasn't the reason why I created the training, but it's a beautiful knock-on or side effect that people will. It's not therapy, just to be clear. It's not clinical therapy in any way, and nor am I a clinical therapist. But you can still find something therapeutic. And the strongest feedback that we receive from any level of the training, particularly the first level 1 training, is how people feel so much lighter having shared part of their story, having listened to other people's stories, and having felt completely heard and seen and held. And if all that happens is that, that release, that sense of I had this knot here and now it doesn't feel as tight, then that's a huge therapeutic moment for people. Yeah. And I find it therapeutic to deliver. I really do. I never find it easy. I always find it difficult to speak about Stephen and other suicides that have impacted my life. But I find it hugely therapeutic to be part of.
You have 2 beautiful kids. They're growing up in a remarkably different world. So I'm going to elevate you beyond fatherhood for a second. You're now the leader of our country, and I'm going to pass a blank sheet of paper across the table with an unlimited budget and ask you, what do you want to do? What do you want to develop to make the United Kingdom a suicide-safer country?
I mean, firstly, you're right. For me, it's children and young people at the heart. So what I would really want to see change would be early investment in education around suicide.
Now, I'm just going to interrupt you there because one of the things that we receive a little bit of is huge endorsement for the work that we do in schools. But just occasionally we get asked the question, are you sure you really want to be doing this? Yeah. Should we be teaching suicide safety planning in school? So take that forward. And I apologise for interrupting you, but take that thought forward if you would.
And I understand it. I understand the fear and the anxiety around it because people, are terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. If I say this phrase, if I ask someone if they're feeling suicidal, am I going to sow the seed in their mind? Am I going to create an unsafe thought? And I get it. I completely understand it, but I also understand the global statistical evidence base that points in the complete opposite direction. That asking somebody directly, that having conversations about suicide, that explicitly speaking about it actually saves lives and can interrupt suicidal thoughts. Yeah. So we have to follow the evidence with this. We have to follow the evidence that the safest way to help somebody feeling suicidal is to speak to them about it directly, not to tread on eggshells or, wrap it up in some other way and disguise it. It's not about. So to come back to your original question, it isn't only about bringing mental health awareness into schools and workplaces. That's important. It's about being explicit with, let's talk about suicide. Let's talk about emotional literacy and emotional intelligence, and give young children the skills to be able to name their feelings, which they're very good at, by the way. But we get good at telling them not to do it, in a roundabout way. And we get good as adults of suppressing that skill. But young children, you ask them how they're feeling, they'll tell you, I feel happy, I feel sad. So it's what I would want to do is more of that, invest early with emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, suicide education, and reward this within the system, those children and young people that are able to be more emotionally open and emotionally available, as we do reward academic progress. If we can reward emotional progress and how people look out for each other, and from a peer-to-peer support, how students and children learn what it takes to look after one another. That's where I would start.
Okay, so
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, firstly, and also to elevate that education into frontline workers more so. Some of the really good work that already happens, I know, it's not about that they're not getting it, but further training and education for teachers, for police officers, for prison staff, for nurses, for doctors, etc., to help them have genuine, safe conversations around suicide and suicide risk. Because one thing I have learned is there's a huge difference between a quick conversation and a deep conversation.
You have done quite a bit of work now on the issue of being a real man and toxic masculinity. Is there anything of that you would like to talk about today? Is there anything that we can bring to the table today?
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's something I'm very passionate about and want to do more in. And I'll take it all the way back to what I shared at the start. When I lost Stephen to suicide, this was not. Suicide is so complex, as you know. Yeah. We cannot say that there are behaviours that will be evident and risk behaviours that you should be aware of that you could challenge, because sometimes there just aren't clear signs, symptoms, and behavioural change. But one thing I know is that at that time I was working in a society, in a community, and an industry where what it meant to be a man was to be tough and strong, physically and mentally. What resilience meant was pushing through, dealing with problems, and getting on with it myself. Yeah. Now, to a point, that can be really useful and healthy. And I'm not saying it's not about accepting challenge and pushing through, but what I am saying is what is equally a sign of resilience is being able to say, hey, I need some help. I'm currently struggling. I could do with some help from you right now. Yeah. And I know this is why this hits home quite strongly. How I dealt with the aftermath of Stephen's suicide was I didn't ask for help. I wore it as something I should be able to cope with. So toxic masculinity is spoken about a lot at the moment. It's pretty big all over social media, etc. And I'm not a huge fan of the term itself, but what I am a fan of is redefining masculinity and actually humanity, redefining what we value as human strengths, and looking at how we can really encourage and reward those who ask for help, those who receive help, those who look for others who need help, and how kindness sort of permeates through. That's really where I want this to go. And it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. But very fulfilling, I understand.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the important works that various charities, bodies and organisations are doing in suicide prevention and postvention. But it still feels to me as if so many organisations remain siloed. Yeah. Good ideas, different groups doing the same thing, and it feels to me that it would be infinitely more powerful to work collaboratively. What are your feelings on that? Because you work across the whole sector, you see different ways of working, you see different challenges. What might collaborative working look like within suicide prevention and postvention?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because the way I feel it is that it's currently competitive rather than collaborative. And competitive with a topic like suicide just doesn't make any sense.
I completely agree.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense. How can you win in this? How can you even call it an industry? How can you win? I find it really difficult to actually align working in suicide prevention and postvention with being part of a revenue stream for my business. I find that really difficult. I've made peace with it because I've decided, right, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it really well. And I'm going to give the highest quality version I can. So to make it more collaborative, it needs to start from the very top. It needs to be funded, not where charities and organisations are competing for the same pot of funding, but actually that's a direct funding stream that brings people together.
Okay.
Common language, common approach, maybe different styles, but working within a safe, unified framework.
Yeah.
And because it's not to lose the absolute importance of charities that have their own family feel, they have their own way of engaging with communities. We can't lose that.
Yeah.
You know, we can't lose the amazing work being done by the smaller organisations that are having high impact.
Yeah.
But we need to move away from this competitive feel where everyone's competing for the same pot of money.
Yeah.
And because what happens is, you're quite right, it becomes a silo and then it becomes protective. We do it better than them. You know, if we can't give because then we'll lose
Yes.
the ability to get funding next year, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
So how we do that, I think it has to start with a very brave top-down decision of let's pull all organisations together that work within suicide prevention and postvention. It's the different sides of the same coin.
Sure.
Let's bring everybody together and let's create a funded national strategy.
Okay.
Yeah,
like
that
it.
would be, and even bigger than that, which is bigger than I guess any one organisation could manage, but it has to change globally. So even now, as we sit here talking with over 10 to 15 years of education in the UK around suicide and how it's changed the use of language, the other side of the pond in America, the phrase committed suicide is still used every day.
Yes.
So something's not working, something's not connecting, you know, the learnings and the growth in one country to the next.
Yeah, yeah. And we're still sitting with a statistic nationally that there's one suicide every 40 seconds across the world. We have so much work still to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're a very avid reader. You quote regularly from books when you're teaching. What are you reading just now? Who's your favourite author? Tell us a bit about Matt Loftus, the bookworm.
Yeah, well, they're different. They're different questions. So what I'm currently reading isn't necessarily my favourite author, but
Okay.
I love reading in general, and I've spent a lot of time reading the last 2 years, lots of Gabor Mate and peers books, because I've recently completed the compassionate inquiry training with him. So my head's been absolutely full with academic work, with trauma-informed work. What I'm reading now, though, is a beautiful book called Braided Sweetgrass, and it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it's I'm only just starting it, but it came highly recommended, and I'm loving the first 2 chapters. You know, it's about lessons from nature, learning from plants and wisdom from the natural world. And it's very different to what I would normally read, but I'm really enjoying it. I have 2 favourite authors though. I have one book from one author, Edith Eger, survivor from Auschwitz, and her book, The Choice, literally changed my life. Literally changed my life when I read that, and it moved me into the coaching world. And it continues to be a huge source of inspiration for me, you know, and I've recommended it to countless people. So from the impact it had on me, that's my absolute favourite.
Wow.
But for pure escapism, enjoyment, holiday reading, I'm a big fan of the Jack Reacher books by Lee Child as well.
Yeah.
So there's some difference for you. Yeah.
You mentioned Gabor Mate and compassionate inquiry. Give us some top lines. What have you learnt from doing that course? Because everyone that I know who's done compassionate inquiry training, learning, has been transformed by it, the way that they operate, the way that they are, the way they do things. Just give us a little bit about what you've learned from it.
It's been huge. You know, it's okay. So the number one thing that actually I learned very early on, but is so monumental, is understanding the source and the power of what is referred to in compassionate inquiry as triggers, that we would talk about as activators and activating events. Where they come from, the power they create in us, how we cover them up as we become adults if they've formed from early childhood, and how they dominate us. And the huge learning was you know you're on a healing journey when you can still be activated, you can still be reminded by a song or a smell. It can still make you feel sad, it can still take you back to the grief and the loss, but it no longer dominates everything you do. It no longer completely traps you in a semi-permanent state. And when you recognize that actually in time, with inner work and time, the triggers or the activators can still be powerful, but they don't dominate you as much.
Okay.
That shifts a great deal. Because it gives you permission to be activated again. It gives you permission to feel the feelings that you should and do feel, and also recognize what a journey you've been on in terms of healing. So when I can bring that in gently into conversations with clients, it shifts everything.
Can I ask you a little bit about masking?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's something we encounter quite a lot in the grief world. And I just wonder, given that I have your expertise in the room, if I can ask a little bit about masking. Why are we so good at masking? Why are we all so good at it? We're brilliant at it. I'm a past master. Yeah. Where does it come from? Where did we lose the honest reality of our naked childhood? And why do we carry that traumatic aspect into our lives?
So simply put, the truth hurts. So we get very good at masking it and hiding it and burying it. And if I give you something to hold on to about that, one of Gabor Mate's own mentors, A.H. Almas, talks about this theory of holes that I find fascinating, that as a child, early childhood, a child is a narcissist by definition, not the version of narcissism that we see in adulthood, but a child is a true narcissist in that they do make the world be about them. So every child is born with the potential to be loved, to be worthy, to have all their needs met. And if those needs aren't mirrored back by their immediate caregivers every time, then it starts to create a hole in their sense of self. So a child can grow up believing that maybe I'm not worthy of the attention, maybe my point of view isn't valid enough. But what's more important is the attachment with my parent or my carer. So I'll be quieter because I can't disrupt the relationship, the attachment.
Okay.
So what happens is the hole develops, and the original source is really painful, but we get good at masking it by burying it back in, infilling it.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. If a child grows up to feel a low sense of value, then maybe there's no coincidence that they work very, very hard professionally to be seen as valuable by others, to get that sense of recognition.
Okay.
And yet, when their sense of value is judged or criticized, then that's like going through all those layers of soil and pushing immediately on the original source of pain right the way back. So in other words, triggers, activators are never about the current moment. They're always about a previous earlier event.
The thing is never about the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And the body reminds you of that. Yeah.
So masking is just suck it up, get on with it.
Yes, and protecting from other people's judgment.
Yeah. Fascinating. So it's a protective space. I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's a protective space.
And so one of the questions I would often ask is, how does that serve you? What is it doing for you? Compassionately, when you mask, how's that protecting you? Is that helping you in any way? And that often helps you get to beneath these layers.
So we talked earlier about the complexity of suicide and suicide grief. And you bring all of this to the table as well. So all our past childhood experience, the trauma of that, the good stuff of that. And then we're expected to carry all this new stuff of grief as well and try and make sense of it all. It's no wonder the suicide community needs each other to sit with, to affirm each other, to just silently be with each other. And
completely.
Yeah. Such an important part of what goes on.
Yeah, people need to feel heard, they need to feel seen, they need to feel that other people get them, and when that's true, when the connection's there, when the empathy is there, then the layers can come off and people can actually start to speak their truth and talk about things maybe they've never spoken about.
Yeah. And we see that happening.
Yeah.
And it's marvelous to see it when it happens. Strange question perhaps, but do you have any unfulfilled aspirations for your life yet?
I do. I've got two. One is I don't think I'm done yet. And what I mean by that is there's a part of me that wants, in some way, to contribute to a higher level, specifically for children and young people. I don't know what it looks like yet. I don't know what that may be, but I feel very passionately that I've moved away in my professional life from directly working with children and young people. But it's still something really important for me to figure out a way to contribute more towards.
Okay.
So that's something. And like I said, I don't know what it looks like, but I know I'm not done with it. And the other one is, from a personal point of view, to find another way to connect with nature again. So I deeply miss the work I did in the great outdoors as an expedition leader and working with groups, and also more personal connection with nature. So one of my aspirations is to find a way through adventure, through exploration, maybe through challenge, to connect again with nature in a way that, well, personally because I want to, but also maybe it can help add value in some way.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a very difficult question. You talked about Stephen earlier and the impact that Stephen's suicide death had on your life. If Stephen was with us just now, what do you think he'd say to you? And what would you want to say to him?
What would he say to me? I think I do actually think, now you've asked me, that he would say to me that I don't have to carry any guilt around this, that he knows I cared about him, that he knows I was a good teacher for him, and that I did everything he needed from me at that, over the last 4 years of knowing him. And I do believe that. I'm not just saying that. I have reflected on this deeply, that I know I did enough. I don't have to live with that guilt any longer.
So important.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm very, very glad I've moved into an area of higher knowledge in terms of mental health and suicide risk, and I believe I can do much more now with that knowledge. And I wish I had that knowledge back then. I really do, because there's always going to be a part of me that wonders.
Yeah.
Would I have seen a behavioural shift? Would I have seen a difference that I may have been able to intervene with? But I'm also okay with knowing that I did as much as I could at the time with what I had. What I would love to say to him, that he deserves to be heard. He completely deserves help and support, no matter what was going on, no matter what pain he was in, no matter what judgment or reactions he'd had from other people. He still deserves help and support, and that it's out there. It is out there, but it can feel a very lonely place unless it's shown to you. So I think that's what I'd want to say to him, that he deserves it, he matters, and that you're not alone. Let me help you. Yeah.
The question that we are asked so often in the Canmore Trust, we know that suicide is very complex. There are aspects of suicidal behaviour that are visible, and there are aspects that are invisible. Do you think that every suicide is preventable?
Sadly, no, I don't think it is. I don't think we can save everybody. And, it's in contrast often to some of the teachings that some of the awareness level courses that exist out there may say the other, or may leave people feeling like every single suicide is preventable, because we know we can disrupt suicide thinking through conversation, through direct questioning.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's absolute. It doesn't mean we can disrupt every person's suicide thinking. I remember I volunteered on the Shout crisis text line for a couple of years during the COVID pandemic and after. And I remember I would have regular people come in that would be put through to me, that I would be supporting, and they knew what I was doing. They knew I was assessing them for suicide risk. They knew I had set questions to ask them in a set order. And they knew what answers to give in order for it not to be escalated any higher or to an active rescue. And yet they were still reaching out for help and support. You know, they were still needing some connection. They still needed someone to hear them. Yeah. And I also think there's just so many complexities to it, and we're learning more about the suicidal brain than we've ever learnt. We've got more evidence around it now than ever before in history. Yeah. And we know that there's a rise in some of the sort of unexplained, unknown suicides where there is no traditional backstory of depression, or no traditional backstory of mental ill health or significant trauma or traumatic events. The pieces of the jigsaw aren't, you know, lining up for every individual, and yet suicide still happens.
And yet that importance of hopeful connectedness for any of those individuals. Please be part of something that may help and assist.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah.
You deal with trauma and struggle and stuff in individuals' lives all day long. How do you stay safe?
Good question.
It's a great question, because it's an important question for me. We've spent the last hour digging deep and potentially re-traumatizing in the storytelling. So how does Matt stay safe, please?
I've learned I have to proactively. I don't think I did it very well early on. I think I still carried in this sense of, I'm good at this, I can do this, I can manage this, you know, I'm good at what I do, ... Compassionate inquiry changed my life completely, because I realized actually the absolute power in having personal therapy. So I had to have personal therapy for 18 months just as part of the training process. Yep. And so now that's what I commit to. I have regular therapy. I have my own compassionate inquiry therapist I work with monthly. I have regular supervision from a psychotherapist and coach supervisor. Yeah. And he helps me massively. We talk about everything and anything. Sometimes it's supervision cases of a client I'm working with. Sometimes it's business related aspects. Sometimes it's personal things I'm dealing with. So I have two professional versions of support, both of which I'm committing to long term while I work in what I do. I think it's absolutely important. I've got good friends. I've got friends and family members who I know I can speak to when I need to, but it is on me. I know they're there, but I don't access them enough. So I'm learning more to do that. And also folks like yourself, you know, I think we've got a very strong bond over the work we've done together, but now it's gone beyond that, I would very happily pick up the phone and speak with you. So having people in my life, you know, that I know I can trust and be honest with. Yeah. And then it's having other self-care strategies that I commit to and turn into habits. So I'm a big fan of cold water, big fan, but not from a point of, oh, it's a tough thing to do. Actually, I've achieved mindfulness through being in cold water. And I know it just creates a sense of peace for me. Yeah. The great outdoors, nature, dog walks, you know, I try and create a smorgasbord of self-care things that I enjoy doing from a sense of enjoyment. And I think, so if we add all of those things together, professional help, support, family members, friendship, journaling from time to time. I'm not very good at it. I try. Yeah. It's all an imperfect smorgasbord of staying safe, but I absolutely know the value of it.
Fantastic. Yeah. There's a smorgasbord to select from. I like it. Yep. Matt, we've been on a journey today, but there's a final question that I ask everyone, and I ask you out of your personal experience, but also your professional experience. If someone is watching or listening to this podcast today who is suicidal, what would you like to say to them?
I'd want to say that if I was speaking to them directly, I'd want them to know that I'm here for them, and I might not always know what to say, but I'm here for you. I want to hear you. I want to be with you, and I'm not running away. Whatever you tell me isn't going to shock me. That they matter. That's a huge point. You matter. It doesn't matter what you're going through or what other reactions you've received. You absolutely matter, and you deserve to be supported and helped. I'd want them to know they're not alone and help's available, and that sometimes we need other people to guide us towards that help. We talk about compassionate signposting. I'd want them to feel that I was able to really let them know they matter, they're not alone, and they're worthy of help, and that I'm going to help them access it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Really helpful. Matt, it's been a joy to have you with us on the Canmore Trust podcast. Time has gone. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to further journeys with Matt Loftus and the Canmore Trust. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
So thank you for being part of this episode of the Canmore Trust podcast. I so hope that you have benefited from being with us and from hearing Matt's story. There was so much wisdom and just life experience in there. Your safety is paramount to us here at the Canmore Trust. So if anything of today's discussion has emotionally activated you or has activated concerns within you about yourself, your own safety, or indeed the safety of others, would you please reach out? You can engage with the Canmore Trust any time of the day or night by texting Canmore, Canmore, to 85258. You can also engage with the Papyrus 24/7 Hope Line any time of the day or night on 0800 068 4141. And you can call Samaritans any time of the day or night on 116 123. The Canmore Trust's website, www.thecanmoretrust.co.uk, has an extensive list of resources for anyone seeking help on any aspect of well-being, mental ill health or suicide. Please take a look at it and please use it. And so if you're struggling, would you please reach out? And if you're concerned about someone else, please reach out. Thank you so much for being part of today. It's a joy to offer you this further episode of the Canmore Trust podcast, and I look forward to being with you in another episode. Goodbye for now.